Lazarus of Bethany, the brother of Martha and Mary, fell seriously ill in late February of AD 30. The three siblings were devoted followers of Jesus and belonged to a respected, well-to-do Jewish family in Bethany. As Lazarus's condition worsened, Martha and Mary sent an urgent messenger to find Jesus, who was teaching in the city of Philadelphia, in Perea. The message was simple and full of faith. "Lord, he whom you love is very sick." Upon receiving this plea late on Sunday night, Jesus at first said nothing. He appeared to pause in deep, silent communion, as if in contact with a higher presence, and then told the messenger in the hearing of his apostles, "This sickness is really not to the death. Doubt not that it may be used to glorify God and exalt the Son." Martha and Mary took comfort in the belief that Jesus would somehow intervene, if not by coming in person, then by using his power from afar to heal their brother. In fact, Lazarus was so gravely ill that he died just a few hours after the messenger departed Bethany for Philadelphia. Unaware of Lazarus's death, the sisters and their friends in Bethany were puzzled when the messenger returned on Tuesday with Jesus' reply that this sickness is not to the death, and no further word or assistance. They sadly reasoned that perhaps the master had received the news too late to save Lazarus. Jesus loved this family dearly. Upon hearing the message, his first human impulse was to go directly to Bethany to help. However, a greater divine plan formed in his mind. Jesus saw in Lazarus' sickness an opportunity to deliver one final, astonishing demonstration of God's power, a last appeal to the Jewish people and their leaders in Jerusalem. He knew the religious authorities still demanded miraculous signs from him. Up to now, Jesus had refused to perform mere wonders on demand or to fulfill popular messianic expectations of a showy deliverer. But now, with the Father's consent, Jesus decided to openly manifest his hitherto unexhibited power over life and death as the most profound work of his entire earth mission. Importantly, Jesus chose to delay traveling to Bethany for 2 more days. This delay was deliberate and meaningful. In that era and warm climate, the Jews customarily buried a person on the very day of death. It was not unheard of that someone thought to be dead, perhaps only comatose, might revive within 1 or 2 days of burial. By the 3rd day, though, decay set in. By the 4th day, all hope was lost, as the soul was believed to depart by then. Jesus knew that for his forthcoming act to have its full impact, Lazarus must be undeniably dead beyond the 3rd day. It was for these reasons that Jesus tarried yet 2 full days in Philadelphia before he made ready to start for Bethany. He wanted the impending miracle to be unmistakable to friend and foe alike. During those 2 days, Lazarus' body lay entombed while Martha and Mary mourned, and many supportive visitors gathered at their home. Early on Wednesday morning, Jesus finally announced to his disciples, "Let us prepare at once to go into Judea again." This declaration filled the apostles with dismay, because traveling to Bethany, just outside Jerusalem, meant walking back into the danger zone. Not long before, Jesus had barely escaped a stoning in Jerusalem. The apostles huddled together, urging him not to return to Judea. "Master, only a few weeks ago in Jerusalem, the leaders sought your death and the people tried to stone you. We cannot let you go back," pleaded James. But Jesus replied with calm determination, using a metaphor. "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? If one walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light. If one walks at night, he stumbles, having no light." He assured them that as long as he walked in the light of God's will, he need not fear. Then Jesus added plainly, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him out of this sleep." Some of the apostles took Jesus' words at face value. If Lazarus was merely sleeping, then he must be recovering. Jesus then told them directly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I am glad I was not there, so that he would be healed, so that you may witness what is about to happen and thus believe." He hinted that this miracle would strengthen their faith for the difficult times ahead when he would no longer be with them. Seeing that their master could not be dissuaded, Thomas exhorted his fellow disciples, "If the master is determined to go, then let us also go with him, even if it means we die with him." With this loyal resolve, Jesus and the 12 left Perea and journeyed toward Bethany. Meanwhile, in Bethany, the situation had turned tragic. Lazarus had died on Sunday afternoon, just hours after the messenger departed with their plea. The family's estate included a private rock-cut tomb in a garden grove, where their parents had been laid to rest, a tomb that only a wealthy family could afford. It was in this tomb, a small natural cave at the base of a limestone ledge about 30 feet high, that Lazarus's body was lovingly wrapped and placed late Sunday before sundown. Jewish custom dictated a propped burial, so by Sunday evening, Lazarus lay in the sepulchre. However, the tomb's entrance stone was not permanently sealed until 4 days later, Thursday morning, to allow for any signs of false death until the third day had passed. Once the heavy stone was rolled into place and sealed on the fourth day, everyone conceded that death was final. The sisters were grief-stricken. Mary, the younger, was devastated by the loss of her brother and gradually resigned herself to it. She no longer expected Jesus to arrive in time to help. Martha, the elder, while also mourning, still clung to a glimmer of hope that Jesus might yet come, even as the days dragged on. She kept a young neighbor posted on the road, watching for any sign of the Master's approach. All the while, friends and relatives from nearby villages, and even Jerusalem, had gathered at their home to console the sisters. The family of Bethany was well known and respected, and although they openly believed in Jesus, their community held them in high esteem. Among the visitors were truly sympathetic friends, as well as some influential Jerusalem Jews, including some Pharisees, who were not kindly disposed toward Jesus, but had come formally to pay respects. The presence of these skeptical, even hostile onlookers would soon prove significant. On Thursday, the fourth day since the burial, Martha's lookout suddenly ran to her with exciting news. Jesus and his band of disciples were just now coming up the road. Jesus had timed his arrival perfectly, reaching Bethany shortly after noon on Thursday, when Lazarus had been 4 days in the tomb. At that moment, many mourners were still with the family, some preparing for the final tomb sealing. Upon hearing that Jesus was near, Martha, who was outside with the watchers, immediately went out to meet him on the road, while Mary, who hadn't received the news yet, stayed inside the house with the guests. Martha's heart was full, with grief, relief at seeing Jesus, and perhaps a touch of frustration as she fell at his feet on the road. "Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died," she exclaimed through tears. Yet Martha harbored no bitterness toward Jesus. Although her words expressed regret, she did not doubt his love or criticize his timing. Jesus gently raised Martha to her feet and replied, "Only have faith, Martha, and your brother shall rise again." Martha found comfort in Jesus' assurance, but she interpreted it in light of her faith in a future resurrection. "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day," she said. Even in her sorrow, Martha affirmed her trust in Jesus, "And even now I believe that whatever you ask of God, he will give it." It was a remarkable declaration of faith under the circumstances. Jesus then looked intently into her eyes and spoke one of his most powerful proclamations. "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he dies, yet shall he live. Truly, whoever lives and believes in me shall never truly die. Do you believe this, Martha?" Martha's answer was immediate and heartfelt. "Yes, Master, I have long believed that you are the deliverer, the Son of the living God, the one who was to come into this world." In this moment of grief, Martha reaffirmed her faith that Jesus was the divine Son promised to their people. Jesus asked Martha to fetch her sister. Martha returned to the house and whispered to Mary privately, "The teacher is here and has asked for you." Mary, who had been surrounded by consoling friends, quickly rose and rushed outside to meet Jesus. The group of mourners, thinking she was suddenly going to weep at the tomb, followed her. When Mary arrived at the place on the road where Jesus still tarried, she fell at his feet sobbing, "Master, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died," she cried, echoing her sister's words. As Jesus saw Mary's utter breakdown and the weeping of those who came with her, his own soul was profoundly moved. For a few moments, Jesus stood with Martha and Mary, sharing in their grief. He comforted them with further words of faith and encouraged them to trust the Father's will even in this sorrow. The assembled mourners kept a respectful distance during this intimate exchange. Yet not all present were sympathetic. Jesus keenly felt the tension at the scene, the sincere sorrow of Mary and Martha that touched his heart, versus the presence of some Jerusalem skeptics whose outward show of mourning rang false. In his human heart, Jesus experienced a swirl of emotions. He truly empathized with the sister's loss. He loved this family deeply. At the same time, he inwardly resented the hypocritical mourning of certain onlookers who he knew were plotting his downfall even while pretending to grieve for Lazarus. This conflict in Jesus' heart, compassion on one hand and righteous indignation on the other, caused him to tremble with emotion. Approaching the tomb, he groaned in spirit. He was also troubled by another grave consideration. Jesus knew that raising Lazarus would call his friend back to mortal life and into a tempest of attention and danger. Lazarus would become the living evidence of Jesus' greatest miracle, and thus a target for the unbelieving authorities. Jesus truly hesitated about bringing Lazarus back for this reason, feeling sorrow at the persecution his friend would have to face thereafter. All these factors contributed to the depth of Jesus' emotional state. Supported by Martha and Mary, Jesus now asked, "Where have you laid him?" The sisters led the way as Jesus, silent, followed toward the tomb. When they came to the burial site, a private family tomb in their garden, Jesus finally wept openly. Seeing Jesus break into tears, the people whispered, "Behold how he loved him." Even some of Jesus' critics were momentarily moved by the evident love he had for Lazarus. Others, however, murmured cynically, "If this man opened the eyes of the blind, why did he not prevent Lazarus' death? If he cared so much, why did he stay away so long?" In front of them stood the tomb, a small cave in the limestone outcrop at the far end of the garden, its entrance closed by a stone. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon when Jesus arrived at this sepulchre where Lazarus had been laid. The stage was now set for one of the most extraordinary events in the history of the world, what the Urantia Book calls the greatest manifestation of divine power of Jesus' entire earthly life. Jesus' voice broke the tense silence. "Take away the stone!" These words fell on the ears of the mourners like a thunderbolt. "Roll away the tombstone?" An audible gasp rippled through the crowd. At this command, unseen to human eyes, the multitude of celestial beings attending this scene, assembled under the leadership of the Archangel Gabriel, readied themselves to execute the Master's will. Resurrecting a long-dead human body was an unprecedented undertaking on earth. The Urantia Book notes that reanimating a mortal in the flesh after days of death is far more complex than the usual resurrection of souls on the spiritual worlds, requiring a tremendous coordination of universe powers and personalities. Martha and Mary, hearing Jesus order the stone removed, were swept with conflicting emotions. Mary's faith surged. She felt a spark of hope that Jesus intended to raise her brother even now. Martha, though believing in Jesus, was more hesitant and practical. She worried about the gruesome reality of death. Stepping up to Jesus, she gently protested, "Master, must we roll away the stone? My brother has been dead for 4 days. By now the body must be decaying." Martha said this with a trembling voice, in part because she did not fully understand Jesus' intentions. Perhaps he merely wanted a last look at his beloved friend. She was not entirely sure, and the thought of exposing her brother's corpse to onlookers horrified her. Jesus turned to Martha with a reassuring expression. "Did I not tell you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Have faith," he urged, reminding her of the message he had sent and the promise inherent in it. "I have come to fulfill my word. Why do you doubt? How long before you believe and obey?" Chastened and encouraged by these words, Martha agreed to have the stone removed. The gathered crowd stood by in hushed anticipation. Several strong men, among them the apostles and nearby neighbors, stepped forward to heave aside the heavy stone slab that sealed the tomb's entrance. With considerable effort, they rolled it away, opening the dark, cave-like chamber of the tomb. An odor wafted out into the warm air, confirming to all that Lazarus's body had indeed begun to decompose, as expected, on the 4th day. Some in the crowd recoiled slightly, covering their faces. Martha herself braced for the sight and smell, her trust in Jesus battling her natural dread. All eyes were fixed at the yawning black entrance of the tomb.
In the dim shadows inside, those nearest the doorway could see a figure wrapped in linen bandages lying on a stone shelf to the right. Yes, there was Lazarus, his body bound head to foot in the grave clothes, his face covered with a cloth napkin. A shudder ran through the crowd at this somber sight. Could a man dead for days truly live again? Many held their breath. According to Jewish belief, the angel of death had firmly claimed Lazarus by now. By the fourth day, the soul was thought to have departed to the hereafter, never to return. No one in living memory had ever been restored to life after so long. By all conventional wisdom, this was utterly impossible. And that is exactly why Jesus had orchestrated events to reach this dramatic moment. At the mouth of the open tomb, Jesus stood with majestic calm. The spectators, roughly 45 in number, looked on in a mix of hope and dread. A great hush fell upon the scene. Jesus then lifted his eyes upward and spoke aloud a brief prayer. "Father, I thank you for hearing and granting my request. I know that you always hear me, but I speak these words for the sake of all these people standing here, that they may believe you have sent me into the world, and that they may know we work together in what is about to be done." Thus, he made it clear that this act was in accord with the Father's will, not a display of magic. The gathered crowd listened intently. Many sensed that they were on the verge of witnessing something extraordinary. After this prayer, Jesus' demeanor suddenly changed. He cried out in a loud, clear voice of authority, "Lazarus, come forth!" These words rang out into the silence, echoing against the rock walls. In that instant, an almost inconceivable sequence of events occurred. The Urantia Book describes that the vast celestial host assembled around the tomb sprang into action in unified obedience to the Creator's word. The very forces of life, marshaled by unseen heavenly personalities, surged to respond to Jesus' authoritative command. Only 12 seconds of earthly time, 12 heartbeats of stunned onlookers when a stirring was noticed on the stone burial slab. Before the eyes of the astonished crowd, the once lifeless body of Lazarus began to move. His chest heaved with a first new breath. His limbs, still swathed in grave wrappings, twitched and then flexed. A moment later, Lazarus sat upright on the rocky shelf inside the tomb. He was alive, but still entangled in the linen strips and facecloth. Seeing their friend now miraculously on his feet, yet still bound hand and foot, Jesus quickly said to those nearby, "Unbind him and let him go." A couple of brave helpers rushed forward into the tomb to assist. Gently, they removed the napkin from Lazarus's face and unwound the linen wrappings that covered his body. Lazarus blinked in the sunlight as he stepped free from the burial cloths with their aid. His eyes were open, and he looked bewildered, but very much alive. For a heartbeat, the assembled group stood stunned, confronted with the reality of a man raised from the dead. Then a sudden commotion erupted. A number of those present shrieked or gasped and fled in terror, bolting back toward the house or running to the village in panic. They were overcome with fright at this supernatural demonstration and needed to escape to process what they had seen. Only a core group remained at the tomb. The 12 apostles, a few of the braver mourners, and of course, Martha and Mary, who rushed forward with tears of joy to embrace their brother. Many who had fled did so not out of malice, but sheer astonishment and fear. Others who lingered prostrated themselves, awestruck by what God had wrought through Jesus.
Lazarus, now free of his grave clothes, looked around in confusion. He saw his sisters weeping, but now these were tears of unspeakable joy. Martha could barely contain a cry of delight as she clasped her brother's hand. Lazarus spoke haltingly, greeting Jesus and the apostles who stood nearby, and then asked in a puzzled tone why he was wearing burial garments and what was happening. He truly had no idea that he had died and been in a tomb. Jesus and his apostles stepped aside to let the sisters explain. Martha, still sobbing with happiness, managed to tell Lazarus about his illness, death, and 4 days in the grave, and how Jesus had just called him back to life. Mary clasped Lazarus's other hand, nodding through her tears and filling in details. Lazarus listened in astonishment. To him, it felt like he had simply fallen asleep on Sunday and suddenly awakened with no sense of time passed in between. Indeed, as the onlookers would later remark, Lazarus could remember nothing of the interval of death, no visions, no awareness. As the Urantia Book notes, time is non-existent to those who sleep the sleep of death. From Lazarus's perspective, one moment he was suffering from fever, and the next he was standing here alive, greeted by Jesus and surrounded by an astounded crowd. There was another unseen spiritual aspect to this miracle. Just as Lazarus emerged, Jesus' personal divine spirit, the personalized adjuster, now the chief of all such spirits in the local universe, issued a command. Instantly, the waiting thought adjuster of Lazarus, the divine fragment of God that had indwelt Lazarus's mind during his life, returned to indwell him once again. Normally, at death, a person's adjuster departs to await the mortal's future on the mansion worlds. In Lazarus's case, Jesus' divine spirit had preemptively arranged for Lazarus's indwelling spirit to remain temporarily on Urantia after his death. Now, with Lazarus alive again, that spirit presence resumed its place within his mind and soul. Lazarus was fully himself, body, mind, and spirit, restored to the land of the living by the power and coordination of countless personalities obeying the Son of God.
Overcome with emotion, Lazarus then approached Jesus. The once dead man, along with his sisters, knelt at Jesus' feet, giving thanks to God. It was a moment of profound gratitude and reverence. Jesus bent down, took Lazarus by the hand, and lifted him up, saying, "My son, what has happened to you will also be experienced by all who believe this gospel, except that they shall be resurrected in a more glorious form. You shall be a living witness of the truth I declared. I am the resurrection and the life. But now, let us go into the house and partake of nourishment for our physical bodies." In these gentle words, Jesus affirmed that this miracle was a foretaste of what awaits all faithful souls, not a return to perishable flesh, as with Lazarus's unique case, but a resurrection to a higher immortal form. Lazarus's very life would henceforth testify to Jesus' claim to be the resurrection and the life. And with practical wisdom, Jesus reminded everyone that they had not eaten properly in the drama of the day. He was inviting them to move from the tomb back to the house to refresh themselves and truly celebrate Lazarus's return. As the stunned party moved toward the house, Gabriel, the archangel commanding the heavenly hosts, gave a signal. The vast multitude of celestial beings that had gathered for this operation was now dismissed from the scene. In the official records of the universe, Gabriel made note of this event as the first and last time on Urantia, Earth, that a mortal human was resurrected in the exact likeness of his physical body of death. Countless resurrections happen on the spiritual worlds, but the raising of Lazarus was a singular occurrence on our planet. The heavenly hosts rejoiced at the success of this mission and withdrew, leaving the visible celebration to the mortals in Bethany. For Lazarus, the experience was at once bewildering and exhilarating. Soon he fully grasped that he had died and been restored to life by the Master. One can only imagine the scenes in the Martha and Mary household that afternoon. Tears of joy, hugs, exclamations of praise to God. Neighbors and friends cautiously returned as word spread that Lazarus was alive again. Many found him reclining at the table, eating a simple meal with Jesus and the apostles, very much alive and well. Lazarus himself had little to add beyond his gratitude. He could only testify that he remembered nothing after falling unconscious, no visions of the beyond, only that he fell asleep and then awoke when he heard Jesus' voice. This point struck many. Lazarus truly had been dead, not merely in a trance or swoon, and thus his revival was an undeniable act of God. That evening in Bethany was one of mixed reactions. Many who personally witnessed the raising of Lazarus or heard the first-hand accounts believed in Jesus with a renewed and fervent faith. This miracle was so public and so unequivocal that it moved even skeptical hearts among the common people. Jesus' followers were elated. Those on the fence were now convinced that here was indeed the Son of God wielding the power of life. But others reacted differently, especially those with prior hostility toward Jesus. In some, the light of faith only hardened into a deeper opposition. They could not deny something remarkable had happened, yet they refused to accept what it implied. A number of these went away angered or disturbed, more determined than ever to discredit Jesus. By midday Friday, the news of Lazarus' resurrection had swept through Jerusalem like wildfire. Bethany was only 2 miles from the city, and scores of people now poured out to see with their own eyes the man who had been raised from the dead. They crowded around Lazarus, peppering him with questions, and many went away astonished and convinced of Jesus' divine authority. The resurrection of Lazarus, while bringing great joy to his family and Jesus' followers, sent shockwaves through the religious establishment in Jerusalem. The Pharisees and chief priests quickly caught wind of what had happened in Bethany and were alarmed at the implications. This mighty work in plain view of so many was something they could not easily explain away. It threatened to ignite a mass movement in Jesus' favor. Indeed, the miracle did strengthen the faith of multitudes and drew new believers to the gospel of the kingdom. At the same time, however, it only deepened the hostility of the Jewish leaders who saw Jesus as an ever-increasing danger. The Council of the Sanhedrin convened an emergency session the very next day, Friday afternoon, to discuss the crisis. In the meeting of the Sanhedrin on Friday, the atmosphere was intense. "What shall we do with Jesus of Nazareth?" was the question on everyone's lips. For over 2 hours, they debated and argued. Some members were infuriated by Jesus' growing influence and the undeniable power displayed at Bethany. Finally, a prominent Pharisee put forth an extreme resolution that Jesus must be put to death immediately, without further ado. This outrageous proposal broke all precedent and nearly split the Sanhedrin. Many hardliners agreed with the Pharisees' sentiment, but others were shocked at this unlawful rush to judgment. In fact, 14 members of the Sanhedrin resigned in protest then and there, refusing to be party to such a travesty. Their resignations would be processed later, and several more sympathetic members would be expelled, leaving the council overwhelmingly stacked against Jesus. Despite this internal turmoil, the majority of the Sanhedrin members were now resolute. Lazarus' resurrection was the last straw. It became clear to them that if something decisive wasn't done, very soon all the common people will believe in him, and the situation could spiral out of their control. They feared that Jesus' burgeoning movement might provoke intervention from the Roman authorities, especially since many of Jesus' followers hailed him as the Messiah or national deliverer. Caiaphas, the high priest, cynically summarized the council's consensus when he stood up and said, "It is better that one man die than that the whole community perish." In other words, Jesus should be sacrificed for the sake of Israel's status quo. This chilling pronouncement sealed the council's deadly intent. The Sanhedrin even went so far as to address the fact of Lazarus' return to life. The next week, they formally summoned Lazarus and his sisters to appear before them. The Bethany family bravely testified to what happened. Lazarus truly died and was buried, and on the 4th day, Jesus raised him. No member of the council could refute it. Lazarus stood right there as living proof. Indeed, many of these leaders had gone to see Lazarus with their own eyes. The council was faced with a miracle they could not deny. Yet instead of reconsidering their opposition to Jesus, they doubled down. According to the official record the Sanhedrin produced, they acknowledged the miracle, but blasphemously attributed it to demonic power.
They declared that Jesus performed signs by the aid of the prince of devils, thereby rationalizing that even raising a man from the dead was no proof of divine mission in their view. This dark twist of logic reveals how hardened their hearts had become. Rather than admit they were wrong about Jesus, they would rather brand God's glorious work as the deed of Satan. In their minds, any explanation was more palatable than accepting Jesus as the Son of God. Jesus knew that the raising of Lazarus would ignite the final conflict, and indeed it did. Friends in Jerusalem sent word warning him of the Sanhedrin's deadly resolve. Jesus was now under greater threat than ever, but he remained serene. The Urantia Book notes that even after hearing of the council's actions on that dark Friday, Jesus was not in the least perturbed. He spent that Friday night quietly in Bethany, and the next day, Sabbath, resting with his apostles at the home of friends in the nearby hamlet of Bethpage, so as not to further agitate the crowds. Sunday morning, before dawn, Jesus gathered the 12 and ready to depart secretly from the area for his own safety and to continue his mission elsewhere. By prearrangement, they went to Lazarus' house to say goodbye. The parting was bittersweet. Jesus' affection for Lazarus, Mary, and Martha was evident as he took leave of the Bethany family that morning. The sisters expressed endless gratitude, and Lazarus himself, healthy and strong, thanked Jesus with a full heart. Jesus urged them to remain steadfast in faith. Then, with his apostles, he left Bethany and journeyed back toward their encampment at Pella across the Jordan. As they traveled northward, Jesus' disciples were almost unable to contain their amazement at what they had witnessed. The resurrection of Lazarus was the most astounding event they had ever been part of. Yet it also raised questions in their minds about prayer, divine will, and Jesus' earlier words. They vividly recall that Jesus had told the messenger, "This sickness is not really to the death." And yet Lazarus did die before being revived. All day as they walked, the apostles discussed this apparent paradox. Jesus had promised the illness would not end in death, but it did. Or so it seemed until he reversed it. What had Jesus meant? Had their prayer for Lazarus been answered or delayed? Was there a deeper lesson? The apostles posed many such questions to the Master on the road. Jesus answered all their inquiries freely, except those seeking technical details of how the resurrection was accomplished. Those mysteries were beyond their comprehension, and he gently set them aside. Instead, Jesus focused on teaching them about the meaning of prayer and trust in God in light of what had happened. During the journey, Jesus gave the apostles profound insights into the workings of prayer, faith, and the divine plan. He explained that finite mortal minds cannot always grasp how an infinite God answers prayers. What may seem to us an unanswered prayer might actually be answered in a higher way or at a better time. In the case of Lazarus, Jesus had spoken with the perspective of eternity. The end of this story was not death at all, but rather the glorification of God through Lazarus' restoration. No sincere prayer is ever denied, but the form of its answer may differ from our expectations when viewed from God's broader viewpoint. Jesus pointed out that when he gave the message not to the death, Lazarus had already been dead for 11 hours in the physical sense. Yet the final result, as all now saw, was that Lazarus did return to life. Thus, the promise was fulfilled, just not in the straightforward way they first imagined. This was a lesson in trusting God's wisdom. The Master emphasized that true prayer must be in harmony with God's will and spirit-led. We must trust God to answer in the way and time that is ultimately best. He encouraged them to continue praying earnestly and never to doubt that their faith-born petitions would be heard.
God's answers, Jesus said, are certain, but they unfold according to divine timing and the eternal good of the petitioner, which mortals might only understand later, sometimes only in the life to come. The apostles absorbed these teachings as they reflected on the incredible days just past. The raising of Lazarus was not only a miracle for the crowds, it was for them too, to fortify their faith for the approaching trials. In the Urantia Book's depiction, the death and resurrection of Lazarus stands as a pivotal turning point. It brought Jesus' ministry to its climax, setting the stage for the final events leading to the Master's own death and resurrection. Lazarus' return from the tomb was the crowning proof of divine authority from many disciples, even as it became the catalyst for the authorities' resolve to arrest and kill Jesus. Through this singular event, Jesus demonstrated the truth of his claim to be the life giver, offering a stunning preview of the resurrection hope he promised to all. What began in tragedy, the death of a beloved friend, thus ended in triumph and a deeper revelation of God's glory. In Lazarus' garden tomb, human sorrow met divine power, and a man once dead walked among the living again by the word of the Son of God. This profound sign, recounted only in the Urantia Book's detailed narrative, remains a testament to the compassionate purpose and cosmic authority of Jesus, who indeed proved himself the resurrection and the life.